Today, as promised, we're analyzing a Shopify store live. We're going to break it down and tear it down into pieces and propose the exact strategy to optimize a store. We've got with me today our awesome conversion rate experts, Christian and Andrew. The guys are gonna take a store and they're gonna show you exactly the kind of methodology that we use with our clients to optimize their conversions. And hopefully you're going to be able to extract some of the value for your own stores. And also the bonus is that at the very end of this webinar, we can pick another lucky person whose store we will analyze as well. So if you're interested, just submit requests to me. Just message me directly if you're interested in having your store turned down and getting some free value out of that. Otherwise, I'm just going to shut up and let Andy and Christian take over. Go for it, guys.
Thank you, Matt. It's Andy here. So first of all, just like to start from the basics, just to make sure everyone's with us where we're at. A teardown really is a visual review of a website, looking for points of friction, ways to improve user experience, ways to build credibility and social proof, identifying really things that could be done a lot better. We've picked a site for today's presentation. Actually, we wanted to have a look at stores that are currently for sale on Shopify Exchange, and this particular site caught our eye. It's available for $40,000 if it really catches anyone's eye and they want to implement some of these changes to increase its value. But really, we chose this site because there are things that are wrong. There are some technical issues, but there's also some clear conversion issues. And this is really just at this stage to allow us to have a conversation around some of the best practice that we would apply on this site to improve the conversions. And by improving conversions, we're effectively meaning that, where there are problems and issues with people navigating, viewing a site, being able to take the most basic actions to be able to move towards that purchase. Over thousands of visitors, clearly that's going to reduce the number of people that are out of frustration or other reasons going to give up and not actually follow through to make the purchase. So what we really are aiming to do here is to find ways to kind of smoothen the path so that visitors can be motivated and easily follow through and make a purchase. The way we're going to be splitting this up is I'm going to focus first on just the site generally in terms of its navigation, its layout, focus a bit more on the homepage as the first page that a lot of people will see of the site, and then I'll hand over to Christian to be able to look at the rest of the purchase funnel. So hopefully you can see my screen. Matt, could you just confirm that for me? My screen is visible?
Yes, all working perfectly, yeah.
Great, thank you. So this is the site that we're working with. It's called Haute Salut, which is a French name, although it's not a French site. It is actually a print-on-demand site primarily for apparel. The first observation that we'd make here, though, and the first thing we would do with any site is, really pose the question, does it pass the 3-second test? And the 3-second test is looking at the site, is it immediately clear what the site is for? What does it sell? What's the value proposition? And I have to be honest, I would say this site doesn't pass the 3-second test. Yes, there are models wearing clothes that are relatively prevalent. However, they're in a lifestyle environment. This first image could potentially be for furniture as well as clothing. The subtitle, Be Your Own Label, which is not very easy to see here, isn't necessarily that clear in terms of identifying what is on offer. So, a first key lesson here is ensure that above the fold on your homepage, that it's extremely clear what you sell and why you're different. What is your value proposition? And then following on from that, related in fact to that is the fact that, there's an issue here with legibility. We've got the text over images which are quite light. The text is in a kind of relatively light color, and it makes a lack of contrast and a lack of legibility of both the logo itself and also the navigation menu. And this is something that's kind of key. Often we want to keep refreshing the site, we want to keep having something new for people to see, but we have to make sure that the site's still doing the job, which is communicating the value proposition and making it easy to navigate. And so the next observation I'd make, even without clicking on anything or going anywhere, is that we have a slideshow here on the homepage, and this is very common on Shopify themes. Everybody installs a theme, and the above the fold more often than not offers a slideshow, as we can see here. And the temptation is to add a slideshow and to offer choice and interest to people to be able to kind of pique their interest with one thing or another. The problem is that study after study shows, and also our experience, that people tend to sit and watch slideshows. They don't tend to interact. They tend to wait for the next one, or it's moving too quickly and they'll have to wait for it to come back. What it does is it causes a lack of action. And what we really want to do here through every stage is encourage people to click through to the next stage of the purchase journey. So the best practice here is not to use a slideshow, but actually to have a single image that features a best-selling item or a best-selling collection with a very clear call to action to encourage a purchase. Just as a quick reference point, we work with a store that does drop shipping, also in apparel, and their homepage didn't have a homepage slider at all. In fact, they had a few side-by-side images leading to a few of their key collections, for example, bikinis, sportswear, and so on. The problem was that there wasn't a single clear call to action. There was basically a choice to be made immediately landing on the site, similar to having to choose between which of these slides I'm going to click on. And there was no clear single direction. What we did on this site was add a shop bestsellers button above, front and center, these links to these collections. And that actually increased the per visit value to the homepage of $1. So it was something like a 70% increase in the value of the homepage with the addition of a single button with a clear call to action. And that is something that we really should take home here, and something that, again, this site fails to take advantage of. We can see that there is a single call to action on each of the slides. It's not very clear. Click to see more. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to be seeing more fall apparel. It's not really a full scene, so it's not very consistent. But also, it doesn't really encourage that buying purchase, that buying mood. It doesn't clearly say, okay, you're going to take the next step on a purchase journey. We'd much rather see something that says, shop here, shop t-shirts, shop this specific shirt. So really, this site is falling down in quite a few different ways. Just above the fold, really best practice is a single strong hero image of your best-selling product or collection, a very high contrast, call to action, single button to encourage people to go to the next stage of the purchase journey. Ideally, something like bestsellers, which is very interesting on new arrivals, that they tend to work best, and that's really what we'd like to see here. One other observation, you can probably just about make it out. There is actually a site search on this site. There is a magnifying glass here, but it's not very easy to see. Similarly with the contrast issues, but also not a lot of space is devoted until you click on it. Search is key for any store. People that search are much more valuable than almost any other type of visitor, any other category of visitor. The main reason is because they have intent. They know what they're looking for. So you really need to make it as easy as possible for them to find the search function. Really have that input field open and available from the very first load of the page. Don't require a click to open it out. Don't make them search for it, because that immediacy could make the difference between them buying from you or moving on to the next store. So that covers above the fold. This is critical primarily because this is your window. This is the shop window that people who don't know you yet are going to judge you by, and this is your best opportunity to make a good first impression and to encourage them to continue the purchase journey. From here, let's scroll down a bit and see what we have. So what we see here is immediately we've gone into a form of collection directly below the homepage, actually with 3 different collections with a variety of products. This is really, an overload, especially for somebody who's new. I'm immediately on this screen faced with 12 different options of sweatshirt. Maybe I'm not interested in sweatshirts, but that's all I can see. It's very difficult if I haven't shopped here before to distinguish that clearly between them. The images are very small. The images aren't actually that great in terms of the fact that they look a rather small size. They're quite an odd ratio. They don't look like a typical sweatshirt. So the product images themselves aren't great, but the main point I want to make here is that don't overload your customers on the homepage. Show them 3 or 4 of your best-selling products, ideally just at the bottom before the fold, so that they can maybe scroll a bit and maybe choose between 3 or 4 of your best sellers. Don't overload them on the homepage with everything you've got. You really want them to click to move on to the next stage of the journey. And that can be either through to a specific product, or it can be through to a collection where it's focused on products they're more interested in. A few more quick observations on the homepage now before I hand over to Christian. Clearly the footer here isn't very clear. The text is very small. They're using italics. Really go for legibility over design. We want to make life as easy as possible. If people have questions, we want to answer them as quickly as possible so they can get back to shopping. Notable by absence here are any credit card symbols. That is a clear indicator and a bit of a subconscious indicator that you are a store, you're open for business, and also it answers any uncertainty over, is my card type accepted? This is a store that's aimed at an international audience with a currency converter, so you would potentially have some people who are wondering whether their local card type is supported. There's also a complete lack of any sort of seals or badges, anything to indicate that the site is secure, anything to build confidence that this is a legitimate, secure site. All of these things really play a good supportive role in encouraging the purchase decision. People who don't know your brand don't know necessarily that you're legitimate. There's a lot of stores out there that have been set up in 10 minutes and are just drop shipping from China on very slow delivery, and you really want to distinguish yourself by demonstrating that you're a legitimate business, you've got strong reviews, that your site is secure and established. I think another quick point to note here in terms of generating trust is there's no contact us page as such. We've just got an email address. People want to know that there are people behind a store. If at all possible for you, have a phone number. Even if it's only a voicemail box, just showing a phone number reassures people that somebody's there. Of course, you need to get back to people if they call you. Most people won't. It's an indicator that, again, you're a legitimate business, and it builds that confidence. It's good that we have a currency converter here for international audiences. We plan in the future to have a short webinar on talking about appealing to international audiences, and certainly allowing navigation and seeing prices in people's own currencies is a great thing to offer, and it's very simple these days. But a few quick observations here if you're doing it already. Use rounding. Round your prices so that when a visitor is looking at the site, they don't see a price of €36.88. It's clear that that isn't the domestic currency. It's a bit of a pattern interrupt. It distracts. So let's have a round currency. It's relatively straightforward to set this up with most of the apps. One of the things that Christian might come on to mention is that with this site and many others, the currency is displayed in the foreign currency, but actually switches back to the original store currency in the checkout. So you have a bit of a distraction, a bit of a problem here when people go from the cart to the checkout that, okay, I'm surfing on a Euro site, but actually when I get to the checkout, it switches to dollars. A lot of people drop out at that stage. They don't understand what's happened. They don't follow that actually, they were just seeing a translated price and now they have to pay dollars. There are ways now with Shopify to be able to allow people to check out in their domestic currency. One great app for that, which I'll share today, we'll cover again in more detail, is this Currency Switcher by Secomap. It's not particularly expensive, but once it's set up, it will allow you both to show the foreign currency in domestic currency, but allow people to go all the way through and check out in their domestic currency using Shopify payments. So that's a great way if you're appealing to international audiences to reduce checkout dropout. One last point I'd like to make here about the site generally, and also another recommendation for a useful tool, is this speed booster. This is basically a group of guys who help with optimizing a Shopify loading speed. Loading speed, of course, is critical and a critical part of conversion rate optimization. You have a lot of dropout if people have to wait too long, and loading time of 3 to 4 seconds is sort of a maximum for majority of people that they're willing to wait. This site suffers from being very heavy in terms of being very image heavy in terms of the underlying images that are loading. 6.47 megabytes of images to load on a home page is going to take forever on a 3G connection on a mobile. So you really need to make sure that the images that you're loading are of the right file format, that they're optimized, and that they're loading in the right dimensions. Again, we'll cover this in a future webinar, but one of the lowest hanging fruits for ensuring your store loads quickly and efficiently is to make sure you've got the image side covered. So a great tool there to run your store through, Speed Booster. We'll share a link on the Facebook group in the future. Unless there are specific questions about what I've covered now, I propose we hand over to Christian and allow him to cover the rest of the site. Okay, Christian, if you're ready, I'll stop sharing and you can go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Andy. Okay, hi guys. For all of you watching and listening out there, I'm Christian. Before I go on with the site teardown, I just want to give you 3 quick golden nuggets around testing your own site, because obviously you want to relate everything we tell you about today back to your own site and how you can then take away all this information. So there's 3 key points, and one of these is probably the best $50 you're ever going to spend in e-commerce, and that's a big claim. But the first thing is, as Andy's pointed out here, we've got a bit of a clash going on. So this website is, I think, clearly based in America, it's based in the US, or it's certainly aimed at the US. And we've got a tell here with free shopping on orders over $50. So this is something that obviously the site owner has added themselves on the banner. And yet when we go to the site itself, we can see, as Andy's already pointed out, that the site is converting back into GBP. When you're testing your own site, if for instance you're based in the UK and you want to see what the Americans are seeing, or your American visitors and customers, it's critically important that you make sure you're seeing what they see. So this sounds like an obvious point, but make sure that you're using a VPN to change your own settings to use a VPN for a proxy server, so you can actually see what American customers are actually viewing. So that's something that's really, really important. And then that way you can see if everything's in dollars, if everything looks right as per your US visitors. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing, and this is the point that I've raised here, which is really, really, really valuable for you. We have in the conversion world, we have a saying that clarity trumps persuasion, and there's kind of a hierarchy of conversion factors that we look at, and it's kind of formalized in this graph here. But the first thing is to make sure that your site is functioning. That's really important. If you think the majority of your conversions happen at a functional and accessible and usable level, in other words, is the site actually working correctly, before we then start to talk about how easy it is to use, and also then how persuasive. People focus on things like, I want to increase urgency to my checkout, and I want to make sure that the copy is zinging and things like that. Those things, yeah, they're important, but they're about 10% of the importance when it comes to conversions. The most important thing is to ensure that your site is functioning correctly. One of the best ways of being able to establish that, we all suffer from what we call the curse of knowledge. In other words, we're looking at our website, we're spending so much time on our own website, building it and growing it and doing all the other things, that actually we're missing some really, really key blinding points that are just, it's literally the wood for the trees. So what I would say is go and do user testing on your own site. And the quickest and the best way of doing that is to go to usertesting.com. And you can create a single user test on there for $49. So it's cheap as chips. And what you actually do on there is you create a series of tasks for a user. You choose the user by country, by age, by demographic, by device, and they will then go and test your website. And typically you'll say, right, you know, what's the first thing you see on this website? What's your first impression of this website? Can you go and search now for a particular product? Can you check out and buy on that product? You then get a video at the end of the test, and that will then physically show you the user walking through your site and actually testing the site in a live format, but also telling you what they think along the way. It's really, really valuable, really important, and I'd recommend all of you do that on your own site straight away. The last point I'm going to make for your golden nugget is look at your Google Analytics. If 70% of your traffic comes from mobile, why are you spending so much time looking at a desktop version of your site? Okay, so what I use is an app called Blisk on my desktop, and Blisk allows you to look at different devices, what your site looks like from different devices. So here we can use the most common and most frequently used device is the Apple iPhone 8, but you'll see a big difference between even just an Apple iPhone 5 and an Apple iPhone 8. So it's a really quick way of just being able to gauge and assess and understand what happens on a desktop versus a mobile. I mean, just take this one example here back on the homepage that Andy's talked about. Look how the call to action button here is blocking the main banner. I mean, it looks terrible. If you compare that to a desktop version of it, then you'll see, you know, there's a big difference in the two pages. So, you know, make sure that you're testing on desktop and also on mobile. That's the third thing that I would talk about. I would do on your own site. So Andy's already touched on the website speed. You know, if I try to go through to, you know, bestsellers or a category page, it's taken me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm still going. I mean, it's just taking forever to load this site. Site speed is so important. You know, if you're just going to do 2 or 3 things on your site, the first thing I would do is look at your own site speed. Something that is mentioned a lot in site speed tests is Walmart, for instance. They lowered their site speed by 1 second, and that increased conversions by 2%. Now, 2% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're looking at a website that is as big as Walmart, then they actually got $200,000 uplift just by improving their site speed conversion. So I would really focus on trying to improve your site speed. As Andy said, probably, you know, with most Shopify stores, the biggest thing, the lowest hanging fruit for you is going to be on the size of your images. Okay, so if you can compress those images, improve those images, and one of the apps that we always recommend is an app called CrushPix, which you can get on the Shopify App Store. Costs about $5, and it will automatically take all of your site images and compress them and make them much faster. But site speed is super, super important. So just going back to now the site that we're doing a teardown on, I'm not even going to pronounce it. As you can hear, I'm a Brummie, so Andy pronounced it really nicely. I pronounce it as Horte Salute, be your own label. It sounds great. So going on to the category page. So what are some of the problems that we're seeing instantly on the category page? Well, the first thing I see is what the hell is going on with pricing here? I mean, we've got $22.48. And then we were seeing $26.49. I have no idea what I'm paying for a t-shirt here. So we want to get that pricing fixed. Now, if this is actually meant to be a sale price, I think this is meant to be crossed out and this is meant to be the new price. Okay, so obviously make sure your site pricing is working on each site. The other thing on a category page, if you think the home page has got one mission, and that's to drive people to either a category page or a product page, your category page has got one mission, and that's to drive your users, your visitors into the product pages. Okay, so when you go into a store, the last thing you want to be doing is clicking on each product on a category because you're not really sure exactly what it is. So make sure under each product you've got just a very brief small description about each product. Here you can see it's not on there. So for me at the moment, these all look the same. They're all t-shirts. I'm not sure what colors are available in besides the ones mentioned. So that's something that I would fix on here. I'd add a short description. Pricing is confusing, as I've already mentioned. The other thing that's clearly missing from here is a call to action button. Okay, so we want to make sure that people can click on through to the product page. So there needs to be a clear call to action button under each one. The other thing is the call to action needs to be relevant. Okay, so what we see on a lot of sites that is a classic mistake is on a category page, we will see something like buy now underneath the product. And the reason why that isn't a good idea is because if you think about the journey that you take yourself, what you want to do when you get to a category page is you want to learn more about the products. Okay, you don't want to buy instantly from this page where you haven't even seen a description of the actual product. So again, make sure you've got a call to action button under here that says view more, learn more, see this product, anything on there that it then encourages the user to click through onto the product page itself. So I'm going to click onto a product page and then just follow up. Here we go. Let's go with one of these. And again, look how slow the page is loading. Something else that's going to improve your product page as well, I think, your site speed as well, is if you're installing lots of apps on your Shopify store, when you delete those apps, just make sure you're cleaning the code out of those apps. Apps are one of the most notorious ways of slowing down your site. And if you've got lots of old code on there, that's really going to slow things down. Okay, so we're on the product page. What are some of the products? What are some of the problems we see with the product page straight away? Well, if you think about your store as a retail store, okay, so with a retail store, a customer can walk in, they can pick up a product, they can smell the product, they can touch the product, feel it, try the product on. We can't do that, obviously, in e-commerce. So what's the next best thing? Well, the next best thing is making sure that we've got super clear, super high res images and lots of them. You know, you can't have enough images. You can have, if you think about Amazon, right, they've got on every product listing, they've got at least 7 images, okay? And then they've also got a further 3 images hidden behind that, but we can click on them in high detail, we can magnify them, we can zoom in on them. And that's something that you need to do. Now, if obviously this product is available in multiple colors, we want to see it in multiple colors. So that's something else that's really important. The third thing is what we want to do is introduce what we call the principle of ownership. In other words, we want to see lifestyle images. We want to see people actually wearing the product. Here we've got one image of one person wearing it, but we want to see them standing up. We want to see them from behind. We want to see how tall they are and what kind of fit they are. The more details you can give, the better. No one ever didn't purchase a product because they had too much information. People only don't buy products because they don't have enough information. So it's really, really poignant, particularly with products images, that you've got really nice, clear, professional images. If you're a drop shipping store and your products are going direct out to consumers, and you might say to yourself, well, you know, I can't even control those images. That's just lazy thinking. Okay, what you want to do is take your top 10 or top 20 best-selling products, have them shipped to yourself, and then get a professional product photographer to take some really, really nice, clean images. It will set you apart from your competition, and it will increase your sales, almost guaranteed. So that's one thing that we need to concentrate on here first. The other thing is, when we're looking for conversions, we're looking to remove distractions and lower friction points. And one thing about distractions is, have you ever, think about this from your own point of view, right? But have you ever shared a product image on a normal e-commerce site and shared it with a friend on social media? And I'm pretty sure most of you, if not 99% of you, are going to say no. So why do you always see these product share images on there? Right, get rid of them. Get rid of the social media sharing images and buttons. They're just a distraction, and they don't do anything to increase conversions. In fact, they just lower it. Okay, so the next thing on here is product description. It's an awful product description. You know, where is the product description on here? I can't see a product description at all. All we've got is a pretty standard generic drop shipping style size guide here, which again is pretty basic. Is this for male or female? Are the sizes in inches? So yeah, it's not a great description. Product descriptions, again, super important. Have a brief, short description. Use some bullet point formats to describe the products, but then by all means have a more detailed description further on. The other thing is look at the difference in font, look at the difference in copy, and also the size of different fonts. It reeks of being amateurish. You know, we've got a massive header here, we've got a smaller one here, we've got another bigger one here. So the whole thing, it just looks unprofessional and amateurish. And, you know, again, just ask yourself the question, would I buy off this site? And if the answer is no, then don't expect any customers to do that either. So that's the other thing. If we then look at your call to action, the important thing is your product title. You know, underneath your product title, it's also not a bad thing to also reiterate your value proposition. You know, champagne crew neck, sweatshirt, you know, and then mention, you know, also mention why people should buy from you. You know, the unique selling proposition is also important. And some sites do this really, really well. Remember, not every customer of yours, not every user of yours is going to land on the home page and then go to category page and then go to product page. They're actually going to land directly on the product page, especially if they're coming from pay-per-click traffic. So we've got a number of reviews in here, which is good. Okay, so presumably if I click on that, it's going to take me down to the review section, which is further down here. We've got sizes, which is fine. Again, what I would expect to see here, though, is this is where I'd expect to see a size guide. Okay, normally we would expect to see a link where people could click onto that. We've got a buy now button. The buy now button's in black, which doesn't stand out on this site because there's a lot of black being used across the site. Okay, so one thing I would say with all of your call to action buttons, the critically important ones, so people, the ones that are leading people into the checkout process, they should be a contrasting color to everything else on the site. Now, it doesn't matter whether they're red, green, orange, or anything else, as long as they contrast with everything else on the site and they stand out nice and bold. We use sites called Bob, which is bright orange buttons. The other thing to remember is make your buttons as large as viable, okay, especially with mobile devices, right? You really want to make those buttons probably even twice the size. The other thing that we recommend is actually to have just an arrow, just kind of clicking people through the process as they follow it. Make sure there's consistency with your buttons, so that people are seeing a green button here now when they add to cart, and then they're also seeing a green button throughout the checkout process. The other thing that I'm going to mention quickly now on the product page is the way that this is laid out is pretty awful. One of the quickest ways of cleaning up your product pages, but also making sure that all of the information is on there that the customer wants, is to use tabs. Okay, and for Shopify, one of the apps that I recommend is EasyTabs. If we look at this amazing website here, which is one of our clients, they use tabs in their product page. So this is their product page, and directly below you can see tabs. Okay, so now when someone lands on this page, instantly they click onto the description. So we've got a nice clear description, we've got bullet points, we've got specs, we've got all the sizes, we've got, is it hand washable, is the blanket suitable for me? The next tab we then got is reviews, and again people can click on the reviews. The more attention that we put to reviews, the more you're going to increase your conversions. Finally, you've got all the information that you would want. So we've got shipping, we've got returns, we've got warranty, but also he's got a section in here about what we do to give back. So this is a really good example, though, of how to use tabs on your product page. So last couple of things I'm going to mention here as well is the related products and apps section. Your product page potentially is a dead end. And if you look on your Google Analytics data, you'll see on your product pages that if you've got a high bounce on your product page, that usually means that people are clicking onto your product page, they're not finding what they're looking for, and they're clicking off. Okay, so one of the ways of decreasing bounce and increasing the likelihood of customers then finding another product is to use apps like this. This one here, this might be a native to the actual theme, but it's what other products are out there on the site that might be of interest to you. So some of the ones that I would recommend would be things like Frequently Bought Together is a good app, and also Bought is a good app, which is also available on Shopify. So what it does is it uses machine learning to recommend apps based on previous purchase history. So it's a pretty good way, again, of making sure that those users aren't just bouncing straight off your site if they don't like the particular product. Last thing I'm going to talk about here is customer reviews. make sure, first of all, that the customer reviews are real. Okay, this smells to me a little bit of perhaps these reviews might not be genuine, they might be genuine, but there's normally some giveaways, and it's not particularly on this product page, but I clicked on another product page, and all of the all of the reviews have been created on the same day. So it's a bit of a giveaway. If I can see it, most users and most customers can also smell it as well. The other thing is the language. Look, you know, there's an exclamation mark after every single comment. Look, really, you know, that's not how people talk. So make sure you're using real reviews. If you haven't got reviews, then go and get some reviews. In other words, give your products out to with giveaways on your social media sites. Use friends and family, but make sure you've got some real reviews on your products. It's a super important way of increasing purchasing and increasing conversions on your site by having that kind of social proof and trust. I'm going to start summing up, but we're going to click through to this particular site's cart page. There's just a couple of last little things I'm going to talk about. So when we click through onto the actual shopping cart itself, there's a few things that we should always try to include as best practice on the shopping cart. The thing here that shows up, which is good, is what are my payment options? Something that we've seen a lot of, particularly since COVID, is the amount of people who are looking for being able to pay by installments, particularly with higher ticket items. So if you've got the option of being able to introduce installment payments, there's an app called Klarna, which works really well for customers, and we've seen actually a 12% increase in conversions as a result of using alternative payment methods. So if you've got alternative payment methods, get them on your site. Make sure that it's featured strongly. All of your payment methods should be featured here on your checkout page. Again, what we're trying to do is encourage people to check out. So anything we can do to reduce that abandoned cart is going to be really important. The other thing is, you know, reiterate your value proposition on here. Reiterate, you know, it says free shipping on orders over $50. Okay, right? So we should have free shipping here. But then later on, it mentions, well, the actual final price is not calculated until you get through to the checkout page. Well, you know, I want to know exactly how much I'm paying for shipping. So make sure that you've got the total amount on your cart page, if at all possible. The last thing I'm going to talk about on the checkout process, and something that we see, it's a classic mistake. This is your standard Shopify checkout page here. If at all possible, reduce the amount of fields that people have to fill in. Okay, so if and this is something you can do. You can customize this part of your checkout process within your Shopify store. But make sure that, you know, for instance, here it says, which is great, if you're going to add a phone number in there, then tell people why you're asking for their phone number. If there is any other options around things like, you know, address page 2 or company, if they're not relevant, remove them. The more we can do to make these fields shorter and smaller, the more that you will increase your conversion rates. The other thing that's really important is make sure you're not forcing your customers to make and create an account. Okay, so here we've got already have an account and log in. So it's optional. It's not even mentioned until later on in the process. That's great. But again, some Shopify stores, they've left the option in the checkout process where it says it's mandatory for people to create an account. If people have to create an account, you're going to lose those people. You know, people don't want to create accounts when they're checking out. So make sure you turn that option off in your Shopify checkout options. I think probably that's pretty much it in terms of what I want to cover. There's a couple of other things that Andy might touch upon just around increasing your average order value. Something that we use a lot with our clients that works really well is post-checkout upsells. And what that means is customers will make a checkout, so they'll buy on your store. Once they've made the purchase and the money is almost in your account, at that point, what we then do is we offer people options to upsell. In other words, you know, if someone buys a sweatshirt, we're going to offer them a t-shirt at a much reduced rate and a discounted price. If they then accept that offer, the the purchase is made and added to your already existing purchase. It works really, really well. It's fairly, it can be sometimes complex to set up, but there's one app that we recommend, which is one-click upsell. It's not cheap; it's about $80 a month. But again, I would really recommend it. You know, where we've seen it on client sites installed correctly, you know, we've seen uplifts of between 9 and 11% in terms of overall revenue and average order value, uplift on average order value. So that's something else that I would also recommend. I think that's probably it for now. There's probably lots and lots of information there for you, so I hope I haven't blown your minds too much. I'm going to hand back over to Andy now just to finish off the webinar. But if you guys have got any questions, then Matt, let me know. Otherwise, both Andy and I can answer at the end.
Thanks a lot, Christian. A lot of value there. Yeah, I think really probably it's a good time to move straight on to questions if there are any, to give us a little bit of time to cover those. Matt, did we have any that have come up already?
So I'll start with my questions actually. Can you guys hear me? Because I'm
Yes.
really curious, because you guys mentioned quite a few apps that are really valuable for improving conversions. What's your recommended app for reviews?
So the general principle is use an app for reviews that emphasizes image reviews. Having reviews is great, it's almost a prerequisite, but where you can feature user-generated content, i.e. customers with the item they've bought, where they upload a photo, that's going to be gold because it's an immediate credibility boost. People can tell, of course, so it needs to be genuine, but yeah, image-based review apps are definitely the way to go. The preferred app there is Loox, which is spelled Loox. And this app both allows you to very conveniently install and display all your reviews, including images that customers have included in their reviews very easily. But it also includes an emailing process where it will automatically email purchasers to request them to provide that image review, potentially incentivized if you wanted to go down that route. But over time, it's always worth following up and asking people for those image reviews because they're just so valuable in building credibility. And as Christian rightly pointed out, you know, there's nothing worse than going to a site and then looking at the reviews and seeing that it's 100% 5 stars. All the reviews are uploaded in the same day. The names of the posters are an initial with asterisks. It just smells of not being genuine. So Loox, Loox would be the preferred app for this particular use case.
Yeah, that's perfect. So let's continue on this route. Preferred pop-up app.
So if I may go first, I think one thing with pop-ups that needs to be cleared up straight away is try to avoid having an immediate pop-up on entering your website. You don't want to distract people from their purchase journey right from the outset. The preferred way to show pop-ups to collect email addresses, also potentially to recover sales, is using exit intent pop-ups. Basically, these are apps that use algorithms to identify by mouse movements or by scrolling on mobiles when somebody's about to jump off your site and go somewhere else. So you have a last split-second opportunity to capture their attention, and that's when you show the pop-up. So you're not distracting them beforehand, you're just getting them at that point. And you're saying, hey, hold on a second, wait, you know, would you like a 15% discount? Enter your code now for an immediate discount. That way you capture their email address, you show the discount code once they've successfully submitted their email address there and then in the second page of the pop-up. Don't force them to go back to their email account and to abandon the site to go and get the coupon code. You will be able to capture some of those customers who are maybe going to exit to go and look on voucher sites by offering a voucher straight away. But otherwise, you've captured that email address to be able to repeat market to them with email marketing afterwards. The preferred app there for this purpose is Privy, Privy. That's an app that's specialized in this area. A lot of the larger email service providers like Klaviyo or MailChimp now also offer integrated pop-ups that can be triggered by exit intent. So there are other options out there, but the preferred one is Privy, Privy.
Cool. What about the customer support app?
Yeah, I would say it's less a conversion rate optimization question and more of a question of what works best with the setup and infrastructure. A lot of these customer support apps are integrated with other software. So more often than not, as long as it's simple and easy to use, on-site chat, for example, a lot of them work quite well. I mean, if you're a starter store, Talk, T-A-W-K, is a perfectly acceptable app and does the job to offer that immediacy of answering questions before people leave the site. If you're a bit more sophisticated, Recart, which has a lot of other features as well in terms of conversational bots and things that you can add on, also offers this online chat bot. So there's a lot of options there. It depends on how sophisticated you are and how much you want to spend and how many features you want to use. But generally, yeah, having some sort of online chat, even if it's just Shopify's default messenger integration, which is also free for every store, is sufficient to be able to kind of capture people's attention and to gather their feedback in real time.
Mm-hmm. And also, Christian, Andy, what's your take on the trust badges that a lot of stores have underneath their add to cart buttons?
Christian, did you want to answer that one? Yeah, I mean, trust badges are really important, and providing there is A, relevance, and B, that they're believable and genuine. You know, we see a lot of trust badges that are clearly produced by some either dodgy apps or some dodgy uploads. And, you know, I mean, the site that we've just looked at was a good example. You know, they've got, although they're not trust badges as such, but they're certainly payment option badges that don't look particularly genuine, and that actually detracts away from conversions. You know, again, you're reducing that bucket of goodwill from a user perspective. So you've got to make sure that your trust badges are designed well, and they fit well with your site. The other thing is, you know, the use of your trust badges. So where do you apply those trust badges? It's important, again, to make sure that they have a consistency going all the way through the checkout process, and they're all of the same design, and they are also relevant to the user journey at the time. So, you know, there's other things like trust badges, which are also really, they're kind of more icons rather than trust badges, but having things like shipping guarantees in an icon, 30-day returns or 60-day returns, lifetime warranty, those kind of trust badges, they work really well. Again, providing they're well designed and they fit in with the overall site design, then yeah, I would recommend them definitely.
Gotcha.
Maybe if I can just add to that in terms of positioning very quickly, I think it's useful to have appropriate trust badges near your call to action. It just helps psychologically for people to feel confident clicking through. Of course, they need to be designed in the right way, as Christian pointed out. So a good place is visible from the area of your add to cart button, visible in your cart for the click through to the checkout. But also it's useful to have other trust badges in your footer on every page, so that, you know, as people scroll through and as people look through, that's reinforced.
Awesome, super valuable. Now, guys, I've got a question from Sasha. Sasha is asking, what are the kind of costs involved in conversion rate optimization program for a store that is doing $100,000 with a 1% conversion rate? So what do we need to take into account? I presume, you know, there's of course going to be some, you need to consider, you know, what you're paying for somebody who's taking care of that, but also, is there any infrastructure costs that you need to plan for?
Andy, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying, like any investment, there's you know, a clear return on investment calculation. You know, you can work out the maths of what a 10% increase in your conversion rate would be, what a 20% would be, by looking at conversion rate, multiplying it through the traffic and your average basket value to give you a difference in revenue. And then, of course, you can work out your profitability and compare that to the cost of having someone work on the site to improve it. It's very clear that even with relatively small percentage increases in conversion rate improvements, if you're a store of the size that you're describing, Sasha, or bigger, that there's likely to be a very fast return on investment in terms of having somebody work on this, especially if you haven't had a focus on this type of work before. The costs will vary depending on the expert, the specialism. At SalesGenomics, we do offer dedicated CRO services, and we're happy to work on dedicated projects. But we also see the real benefit of combining conversion rate optimization support with our advertising media buying services. And it's almost in every case where we offer Facebook ads management or Google ads management, we also offer the conversion rate optimization support and advice, because that can only magnify the returns you get from your advertising. In terms of infrastructure costs, there can be some costs involved. Christian, for example, mentioned the cost of user testing, relatively small. There may be additional apps we recommend, and they can vary anything from $20 to $50 to $100, depending on, what the level of sophistication of the app you wanted to use. In terms of, one of the big questions that people might ask, what about A/B testing? A/B testing is a part of CRO. It only really makes sense from a certain scale and size of store. We really need to be seeing 100,000 visits a month. We really need to be seeing, over 100 conversions, probably more than 500 to get statistical significance with a lot of testing. There are hard and fast rules, but generally, with conversion rate optimization, ideally, if your store's big enough, we want to be testing every change to make sure we have the strength of data to support the improvements. In terms of costs involved with that, there are enterprise packages available, and they can be worthwhile. But what we find for 90% of cases, we can use Google Optimize, which is a free app, which is kind of a part of the Google Analytics suite, which we can set up as part of the process, and that allows us to test almost everything we'd want to at little extra cost. So it's really a question of the cost of the return on investment on the cost of somebody giving you this advice, the cost potentially of involving a developer in making the improvements. If it is quite a sophisticated change, that's only in a minority of cases. Very often the changes can be done by the CRO consultant directly themselves, and then any sort of app costs, but unlikely to incur expensive enterprise level A/B testing costs unless you choose to go down that route, and that's probably much later than kind of picking the low-hanging fruit and making the 80-20 of improvements.
Yeah, Andy, maybe do you want to mention your initial experiences with the new tool for A/B testing you've been using? What's the name again?
Yeah, we've been working with Convert.com, with a very large store that does tens of millions of dollars of revenue per year. Still very early stages, but it does actually integrate very well with Shopify. If you are a Shopify Plus store owner, it can make sense to use something that bit more sophisticated. The starting cost for something like that, though, is $700 a month, and it goes up depending on your traffic. So you really do need to be investing in a kind of quite a big testing program to justify those costs. But you can do more with it. You do have more flexibility. One of the issues you have with free tools is relatively difficult statistically to test price differences on your products with something like Google Optimize. You can do things like change the price every day with some apps, and then after 2 weeks compare the days where it was one price and the days where it was another price to give you a good indication. If you're a small store, that's fine. But if you want to do some sophisticated price testing on Shopify Plus, then probably something like Convert.com makes a lot more sense. And so we'd recommend a much more sophisticated testing suite like this. Other examples are VWO, Visual Website Optimizer, or Optimizely. They're very similar. The benefit, of course, with these as well is that they have a dedicated support team that know Shopify intimately. So we can really test the limits, if you like, of testing by using some of these more sophisticated tools. But for most sites, it's probably overkill, and the free tools will do the job nicely.
Yeah, I think you also touched upon a very important thing, is that pretty much everybody who first hears about conversion rate optimization, the first and the most exciting thing for all the stores is A/B testing, right? But in reality, for some smaller stores, below 7 figures annual what will happen, right? And you guys can expand on this much more, is that there's so many low-hanging fruits that you can pretty much implement right away with guaranteed conversion lift, because those are just such obvious conversion killers on the side, that starting from A/B testing those is actually losing money, right? It's actually wasting time that could be instead used to implement those low-hanging fruit and start the testing program afterwards, right?
Yes.
So I know that we've been chatting about this lately a lot.
Yes, I think that's very true. Ultimately, there is such a thing as best practice. We are very aware of the studies and the reports and our own tests, and we see what works. Generally, though, when we look at improvements, it goes back to what Christian showed early on in the webinar, where he showed the pyramid of improvements of a site. And really, when it comes to improving core functionality and accessibility and user experience, that doesn't necessarily, especially on smaller sites, really need to be tested. It's pretty obvious looking at the site we were just looking at that if we optimize the images, the site would load faster. We could do that in a day with an app, in fact, within an hour with an app, and have an immediate benefit with virtually 100% confidence that would be an outright improvement. Currently, it's an impediment to converting. There are other things on this site, for example, from the product page, you have to click 3 or 4 times to be able to get through to the cart because of various pop-ups and so on. Just simplifying that by reducing a couple of those clicks clearly would increase the number of people arriving in the cart and getting further along the journey. So there's a lot of relatively obvious things if you know what you're looking for. If you're not kind of suffering from what we all do, which is the blindness that comes from looking at the same site day in, day out, and that's just the way that the theme developers built it. There's a lot of things that we can act on very quickly that are very obviously going to improve functionality, accessibility, user experience before we get to those high levels of the pyramid, where we really are testing for the small incremental gains in terms of convincing people and persuasion and so on. So that the majority of stores will benefit from very quick implementation and analysis of just core leaks in the bucket, if you like, or points of friction that would prevent people from making their purchase.
And Christian, I think what some of the viewers may find interesting is, especially those who have never had any conversion rate optimization program, is what is the process like? What kind of, what do we first do when we look at the store? What happens next? When does A/B testing come into play? How do we prioritize activities? And, like what can be expected from this kind of program?
Christian, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what we've shown today is just an absolute snippet of conversion rate optimization. It's kind of a small but important stage of the process. The one thing I would be careful of is if obviously, if you go out and look on Upwork or Fiverr or any other sites and there's people on there and, claiming to be conversion rate optimization experts and everything, and that's great. But when you're interviewing those people, when you're engaging with those people, listen for the language they're using, because if they use words like best practice or this works really well on another site, so this is what you should do, just be a little bit careful, because the most important thing that we look for in everything we do is data. My job and Andy's job is just quite simply to look for areas of friction within your site that prevent or slow down conversions, so that prevent or slow down people from making a purchase for an e-commerce site. And then we're also looking for opportunities that will increase those conversions. And where we get that information from is not really actually the site, but it's actually from the data around the site. So we spend a vast amount of our time looking at data and looking at Google Analytics. Before we even look at the data, we want to make sure that data is set up correctly. So we have like over 100 checkpoints on our own Google Analytics setup checklist, to ensure that the data that we're using to make decisions on your site is correct and accurate. And so that's the first stage of the process. We want to make sure we've got all the data set up correctly, and then we do a real deep dive into that data. And what we're trying to do is assess and understand the user journey. Now, we're also using other qualitative methods, such as we'll use things like tools like Hotjar, so they display heat maps or scroll maps. We also use screen recordings. We also use user testing. And we also use things like customer services. You know, if we're working with a client, we'll actually go and interview their customer services team, and we'll say to them, what are some of the biggest objections that your customers come back to you on? What are some of the biggest complaints that you have? And again, we're looking for other evidence of data that confirm those theories. And within the data, we're looking for outliers. We're looking for breaks in the pattern. We're looking for either something that's really positive or something that's really negative. For instance, as an example, if we are seeing a really low conversion rate on mobile versus desktop, you know, a certain tolerance is expected because it's a lot harder to use a mobile device to buy a product than it is on a great big desktop. But if the conversions are way out, and if we're seeing a much higher conversion on desktop versus mobile, we're going to investigate that in more detail. And it's a bit like pulling a thread and being a bit of a detective. So, you know, the first thing we want to establish is, are there any functionality issues? So we'll then start to segment the data within Google Analytics, and we'll start to look at, you know, is it the size of the screen that's having an impact? Is it the type of device? Is it the browser that the customer is using? Is it the location? Is it Wi-Fi versus, or is it, you know, a particular network? Is it a country? And we're really trying to segment and understand and really do a deep dive into that data to try and establish exactly where the potential problem is. And that's kind of the data gathering process. We then combine that with customer interviews. You know, we're using things like exit polls to understand why a customer left the site without making a purchase. And we carry out, again, a heuristic analysis, so a little bit like the teardown we've just done today, but we do a much more detailed assessment over the site using our kind of expertise and experience that we've built up. We put that all together in a great big audit, and you know, the audit process itself normally takes us about a week to 2 weeks to create, and then we present our recommendations to the client. What we then do is we work with the client to create a table of prioritization. So we use kind of like a scoring method to establish, we talk a lot about low-hanging fruit, but it's like, where are the biggest opportunities for increasing and making an immediate impact on the site? Where can we create a difference in terms of conversions from a revenue aspect, but also with tests or with implementations that are easy to implement? You know, is it something that's going to require lengthy A/B testing and, you know, a complicated setup in terms of the test itself and the build? And do we have to involve lots of people from around the company to put that test together? That's obviously going to be scored at a much lower rate than something like, for instance, you know, site speed or increasing the relevance or size of the search box. So that's kind of a summary of the process. And then what we then do is we either move to implementation for any of those obvious points, or then we move to testing where it's relevant. So as Andy said, you know, if we've got sites with more than 100,000 visitors and, you know, anything from 500 to 1,000 conversions a month, those are kind of the sites where we look to then implement split testing. Again, those tests are prioritized based on the impact they're going to have on the site and how easy to implement they are. And then what we're looking for is what we call statistical significance. In other words, we're looking for confidence. We're looking for a 95% confidence that the answer that comes back, so that the test result is conclusive. Okay. And then, we normally run that test for at least 2 weeks, but most tests can take between 2 weeks to a month, depending on the complexity of the test itself, but also obviously on the volume of traffic that we're putting through that test. If that test is then conclusive and also we've got a result from it, we either then we'll review the result, but we'll either then implement the variation if that showed a gain in and an uplift in conversion rates, or we actually discard the test. But what we do is we look for learnings from the test. So we say, well, okay, that test didn't work, and the control, actually the original page was much better than the actual test result. So what went wrong with our kind of hypothesis? What went wrong with the answer? Why did we not get the answer that we were looking for? Why did we not get the result we're looking for? What can we learn from that test? Because now we're going to test another test against the control again. If obviously the variation was an improvement, we also test that variation again and say, okay, well let's implement that variation, but let's look at ways that we can improve that variation again. And what we're looking for is constant iterative improvement, and just slowly improving the conversion rate of the site. And over time, that's where we get those kind of 20, 30, 40% increases. You know, it's rare that we'll get a one-off test, you know, change the red button to green and we see an immediate 50% uplift. That's pretty unusual, to be honest. It's more about incremental improvement, and that's where we get our results from.
Yeah, so the testing is definitely a very interesting part, and this is literally the first thing that pops up when you start researching what conversion rate optimization is. And it's great, right? It's so much fun when, for example, you know, for massive sites like BlendJet, when, you know, we're testing a little tiny thing and it's bringing, you know, just a teeny increase in conversion, which essentially results in a massive uplift in revenue anyway. So this is exciting, but at the same time, so, you know, what happens with conversion rate guys is they tend to be geeks, and they tend to just focus on, you know, hey, here's my data, I need to get my statistical significance. But actually, as you know, in reality, and as e-commerce entrepreneurs ourselves, we know that, you know, we have to be pragmatic about, you know, what kind of activities to prioritize, and we need to move fast because time is money, right? So also what I want some of our viewers to take away from this, and is don't wait for A/B testing. You know, there's not always enough time to wait for statistical significance. You know, there are actually loads of low-hanging fruit to implement initially on most of the stores. You know, like pretty much with no store, we start with A/B testing right away, because, you know, there's just so many things are just wrong, and we need to make sure that we remove the conversion killers, the obvious conversion killers, before we actually allow ourselves to take all the time to implement the proper testing with statistical significance and everything, right? So
Matt,
I guess
if I can
there has
just
to be a balanced track here. Yep.
If I can just add a comment to that, I mean, a lot of people, a lot of store owners, you know, they buy a theme from a Shopify theme developer, and then the question is, well, why isn't this stuff optimized out of the box? You know, why isn't it optimized for speed? Why isn't it optimized for the user journey? Why is conversion rate optimization necessary if I've just gone and bought you know, a theme from some developer experts? And the answer is that almost every theme out there is not designed with conversion optimization in mind. Almost every theme is not designed with speed in mind. If you're a theme developer, as a business, you want to make sure that, you know, you offer as many features as possible to compete against alternative themes. So you tend to stuff a lot of extra options that into your theme that may not be necessary. But you also that can have some speed implications. But also you want to make it as easy as possible for your customer to customize and make changes without being a coder. So you have a lot of different options. So the motivations from the theme developer's point of view isn't the same as a conversion rate optimization perspective. It's not even the same as really, it's not really an aligned incentive with the purchaser of a theme, in that, you know, obviously what we care about pragmatically as shop owners is how can we maximize our revenue? How can we get sales efficiently? What the theme developers are focused on is marketing and selling a theme with lots of features and making it really easy to make tweaks without coding. And so that's why you have this disconnect, and why almost every store can benefit from conversion rate optimization from a basic heuristic point of view, with no testing at all, almost straight away. And you know, we can you know, turn around a CRO audit for a smaller store in a matter of about a week to 2 weeks maximum, and we can, you know, within a month already have made several high impact changes, simply because, you know, a lot of almost every theme, in fact, out of the box doesn't take this stuff into account.
Yeah, and on the other hand, you've got the themes designed with conversion rates in mind that are just overflowing with those, overkill features. I think I've heard of this theme called Turbo, is it called? Which is just perfect for dropshipping stores. But if you're trying to build a brand, you can't afford to have so many, scarcity boosters, because it just turns, just detracts people from wanting to shop with you again. Right, so it's fine if you're just looking for those impulse buyers, but if you're trying to establish a brand, it's not going to do a good job for you anymore, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So just a quick question on this note: what's the best free Shopify theme for new store owners?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult question, and the reason is it very much depends on things like whether you're a single product store, whether you're a general store, whether you're in a specific niche. Generally, Shopify's own themes have got a lot better recently. So Debut, which tends to be more for smaller stores in terms of the range of products, is quite a good one to start with. But if anyone's interested, we can always offer advice. But it is really a little bit situation and vertical dependent. Christian, do you have any other specific thoughts on that?
No, you're absolutely right, Andy. I mean, it really depends on the type of store. If if I'm setting up a high-end luxury brand, I'm unlikely to use Turbo or Debut as a theme. You want something that's going to be reflective in the user experience as much as things like speed are very important. But yeah, I mean, it really depends. I mean, the one thing is, as for a starting store, there's some great themes available for free. But anyone who's probably looking to create something larger or more complex or give a much better user experience, then I would look to purchase and customize a theme.
And I think probably just to emphasize that point that Christian just made, it is possible to kind of go overkill and use every feature in a theme and you just have too much. It's actually counterproductive because it's distracting. But there is definitely a benefit if you are a store that's growing fast and you anticipate need of a more sophisticated theme, to go for one of these more feature-rich paid themes, because very often these themes include features that otherwise you'd have to add as a third-party app. And those third-party apps then have to load their own JavaScript, their own CSS, their own styling and so on, which can slow a site down. So if you are the right candidate for a sophisticated paid theme, then it can often be a good balance to find one that offers out of the box some of the features that you would otherwise have to add additional apps for, because then it's all integrated and tends to load a lot quicker, including those features.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe to drive the point home, every store is different, every niche is different, and some of the conversion principles conversion principles will stay the same, but some of the specific advice we would give is gonna vary based on that. So if you would like to receive some personalized advice, just drop us a message. Type in the group, connect with me, Andy or Christian here in the group. We'll be happy to offer some free advice. And also, if you're interested to get a deep dive, our guys Christian and Andrew to dive deeply into your store analyses, and you want to be the subject of the next Shopify conversion teardown, then also let us know. We'll try to go easy on you, so you can see it's not as scary as it may sound, and from pain comes comes the learning, right? So hopefully it's going to be super valuable for everybody. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here, and thanks so much for you, Christian and Andy, to offer so much advice. I'm really excited about the next editions of the Teardown. And yeah, guys, any last remarks you've got?
No, not for me. Thanks, Matt. Good luck to everybody. If, as Matt says, you've got any questions specific to your site, then by all means feel free to drop us a line at SalesGenomics, and we're happy to try and help you with some queries. And obviously, if you are looking for some expert help, give us a shout. We'd love to take a look at your site in detail and maybe help you drive up your revenues and traffic and conversions.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot for staying till the very end. This was e-commerce scaling strategies by SalesGenomics, brought to you by Matt from SalesGenomics. If you're interested in more tips and strategies on how to scale your e-commerce business, visit our Facebook group called E-commerce Scaling Strategies by SalesGenomics, or follow us on social media.